Okay, so basically here EI, this EI field is nothing but incident field at Q equals to QD point. Okay, that is the main important thing. So that is a point of, you can say QD is the point of attachment, and we will see that when we will discuss the diffraction from the curved surfaces. Now again, that amplitude spreading factor, so this is the amplitude spreading factor, right? So this amplitude spreading factor is not only dependent on the geometry of your structure, or let's say age. So let's say as of now we have discussed a geometry where we have a straight edge, right? So let me just highlight here. So here we have a straight edge, right? This is a straight edge here, but you can also have a curved edge. Instead of that, you can also have something like, let me just draw here only. You can also have something like this, okay? Or maybe let me change the color so that it is much more clearer to you guys. So you can also have a curved edge like this. So that will be something like this. So instead of that straight edge, you can have something like this. And then from there, you can have something like this and this. Same thing here. And this is a dotted line. So this is now a curved edge. Okay. So for that type of curved edge, you would have to incorporate a spreading factor. Okay, you have to incorporate a spreading factor, amplitude spreading factor, that is given by this A, correct? Amplitude spreading factor. Now that is based on the geometry, whether you have a curved edge or a straight edge, based on that. But even if, let's say if you have a straight edge, even after that, your amplitude spreading factor can also depend on the type of source you are having. So this is what you can see here, right? So this amplitude spreading factor is not only dependent on the curved or geometry of your structure, but it also depends on the type of incidenting waves you have. So for plane wave or cylindrical or conical waves, you might have something like this, okay? And for spherical wave, you might have something like this as a spreading factor. So, so what I want to say is, for amplitude spreading factor, it depends on two factors. First is the geometry of the structure itself, and the second one is the type of source we have, type of incidenting waves we have, whether we have a plane wave incidence, we have cylindrical wave incidence, or a spherical wave incidence. Now, let's say you have a two-dimensional diffraction. For a two-dimensional diffraction, again, your diffraction, diffracted E field will be proportional to incident. Let me change the color of this pen. So it will be proportional to incident E field, right, at point Q. Okay, then it will be proportional to some diffraction coefficient. Also, you will have this coefficient for the amplitude spreading factor, and then you have a phase factor. So here you can see that basically that incident field at the diffraction point, right, that is EI, the EI at Q. Then D is a dyadic diffraction coefficient, right? Now amplitude spreading factor 1 over square root of rho is nothing but for cylindrical wave, and then you have e to the power minus j beta rho is a phase factor. Again, as I mentioned, you can see that if you have a cylindrical wave, your spreading factor would be something like 1 over square root of rho. If you have a spherical wave, it will be something like 1 over r. And if you have, let's say, plane wave, then it would be 1. Okay, so for plane wave, it will be 1. And that's why, again, I mentioned that even for the reflection coefficient, when we define a Fresnel reflection coefficient, we did not explicitly had any kind of amplitude spreading factor, right? Because it was a plane wave case. Now, for a knife wedge or knife edge wedge, what would be the diffraction? So again, as we have discussed, what is a knife edge? Basically, your alpha is 0. That wedge angle to alpha is nothing but 0 degrees, meaning that you have something like a half plane. So this is like a half plane. Okay, this is what your geometry is. Okay, with a 0 degree alpha. When we have something like this, what will happen? We can divide the region in two parts. We can divide the region in two parts. So let's say we move our observer. So we here is our observer. Okay, here is our observer's eye. Okay, so we move this observer along the x-axis. So if we move along the x-axis, okay, so we can divide this into two regions. One will be when you have x negative. Okay, so this is a capital, this is a positive x direction, and this is, let's say, this is your origin. So for the negative values of x, that will be your region 1, and then when you have a positive values of x, that will be your region number 2. So ideally, as per the geometrical optics, geometry geometrical optics, as per the geometrical optics approximation, you would see that in this region, region 1, where you have x negative values for the x, basically in that region you will have a direct fields incidenting from the source. Okay, you will be able to see or you will receive the waves which are basically incidenting directly from the source. So that is a region 1. And as per the geometrical optics approximation, for the positive values of x in this second region, because that region is right behind the our knife edge, basically you will not have any type of field. So basically here you will have a 0 field. So if we plot that as a function of x, so this is on x-axis you have a x, basically on x-axis you have on the horizontal axis we have x values. So you can see that for the negative values, okay, using geometrical optics approximation, that is solid line, you have a value of 1 normalized. This is a proper basically normalized, it is normalized to incident wave. So basically you have a 1 magnitude in that region, and then when you shift to or move to the second region, basically when your values for x are positive, that is this region, in this region you can see that that value drops down to 0. Okay, so in the second region basically you have a 0 field predicted by the geometrical optics approximation. So what we need to do is we know that we cannot have something like discontinuous fields, right? So basically in order to make a continuous waves, in order to have a continuous waves, and also in that region here, in this region, we also don't have any kind of sources induced. We don't have any current density induced in that region, which can again make your fields continuous, okay? Which can satisfy your Maxwell's equation. No, it's a free space. It's a free space behind in this second region. So we don't have any current density. So your fields have to be continuous. So in order to compensate for that, we introduce this diffracted fields. And you can see that those diffracted fields are basically represented by or denoted by dash line. So that is nothing but this one. Let me just highlight that. So this dash line basically is here, right? And this is just the amplitude, okay? This is just the amplitude of those diffraction coefficient. Now what will happen, as you can see that in the region 1, okay, here in this region, for the negative values of x, you have diffracted fields as well as you have a direct fields, incidenting fields, right? So there will be some constructive and destructive interference pattern in that region, right? So in that region, here in this region, for negative values of x, here in this region, since there are direct fields which are basically received in that region, as well as the diffracted fields are also present in that region, uh, because of that, what will happen, they will create constructive and destructive interference with respect to each other. Basically they will add with each other, and since they are out of phase, and again look at this. So here from this edge, basically you are uh, create the fields are basically radiated or detached. They are being detached or get diffracted from that point, right? So you can say that as a function of this angle phi, okay, those fields will vary, right? Those fields will vary as a function of phi. Phase will vary, right? Phase will vary when we project that on this x-axis, and as a result of that, there will be some phase variation in the diffracted fields. So when you look at the total field, when we add diffracted field with the direct field, you see this ripples in the response. Let me highlight that with some other color. So then in that case, you basically see this type of ripples, variations in the first region. And since in the second region, you only have diffracted fields, basically your total fields are nothing but the diffracted fields. So that is given by this dotted line, total fields. Okay. So now this is a plot for the where we have on the y-axis magnitude of the field. So as you can see that the total diffracted fields are going to be around 0.5 at x equals to 0. For x equals to 0, it is around 0.5. Okay. And as a result of that, total field also be almost a 0.5 because it gets subtracted from your direct field here at this point, because they are out of phase. Now, this is again the same case. Basically, these two are for the soft polarization. These are the case for soft polarization. So as you can see that now this is in terms of dB. Previously, it was in the absolute case. Again, you can see that at x equals to 0, since that diffracted fields are 0.5 of that total, basically you can see that it is minus 6 dB, around minus 6 dB down, and even the total fields are minus 6 dB down, right? So this is in terms of dB, decibels. Previously it was in the absolute. Now the same thing you will also observe for the hard polarization, okay, hard polarization. And again, make sure that our source is located at phi prime equals to 270 degree. Okay, 270 degree, that means it is in the YZ plane. Okay, it is in the YZ plane in the negative y direction. It is here. The waves are incidenting from there. Okay, source is located in the negative y direction. Again, you will see that we can divide this observation region in two parts, where your x is negative and x is positive. So for the region where your x is negative, in that region again you will see those ripples because of the constructive and destructive interference between your diffracted and direct fields. Okay, and this is for the magnitude absolute values. And when we plot in terms of decibels, again you see that ripples basically, right? And again it will be around 6 dB down. It will be 6 dB down approximately, right? Now you can extend this for the finite ground planes, right? So finite ground plane, when we consider finite ground plane, here let's say you have a rectangular ground plane, then you have 1, 2, 3 and 4 edges. So you have 4 edges. So for all 4 edges, we can again extend the same analysis for the ground plane for with a finite width and length. So as you can see that here in this case, we have a monopole antenna with a lambda by 4 length placed above the ground plane, where your width and length of the ground plane is nothing but W. Okay, both width and length are W. So it's nothing but a rectangular ground, it's nothing but a square ground plane instead of rectangular ground plane. And again, as I mentioned, you will have these edges from where you will see the diffraction. Now, as you can see that basically you will have four types of fields now. One will be direct radiation from the monopole antenna. The other will be from the reflected fields from the or fields reflected from the face or the surface of the ground plane. And then you will also have diffracted fields from the edges. Okay, and as you can see that the diffracted fields from the opposite sides of your ground plane will be directed in opposite direction. Okay, so here it is directed in the same direction as direct field. Here these diffracted fields from the left hand side is directed in the opposite direction. And when we plot that, basically because of those, when we add all these four fields, you can see that as a result of those diffraction, you can see these back loops. Okay, these back loops. Now notice that these levels are somewhere around minus 15 dB. These lobes are somewhere around minus 15 dB. Okay, now, and as you can see, again, you have a very good agreement between your experimental, that is nothing but a measurement results, and geo with GTD. Okay, here also the predictions given by geo is also shown, that is nothing but this dotted line. So you have a field only in the upper hemisphere predicted by the geometrical optics, because geometrical optics basically you don't have finiteness. Okay, and as a result of that, you will not have any kind of radiation on the lower hemisphere. Now similarly, you can also do the same thing for circular ground plane, but now for the circular ground plane, now you have a curved edges, right? You have a curved edges. So for that, you would like to add some kind of amplitude spreading factor, maybe, right? So we showed that, right? If you have a curved edge like this, we introduce additional spreading factor. Also, this is not a plane wave incidence. Remember that. Keep in mind that this is not a plane wave incidence. You have a monopole antenna placed right on top of your ground plane. That means you don't have a plane wave, and your radiator or point source is placed in the near field, in the vicinity of your scattering object, that is ground plane. So as a result of that, it will also introduce some kind of additional amplitude spreading factor. And this is the geometry. Basically, you have a monopole antenna placed above this circular ground plane. And when we do that, we look at the cross section. Basically, the two opposite edges again will diffract the fields in two opposite directions. One will be directed in the same direction as the direct radiation, and the other one will be in the opposite direction. And when we do that, you can see that now your lobes, this on the back end side, on the back side of your ground plane, now they are having around minus 8 dB. The level of this back lobe is somewhere around minus 8 dB. Compared to rectangular or square ground plane, this is much higher. So previously we had somewhere around minus 15 dB. Now it is somewhere around minus 8 dB. And you can explain this because your ground plane is now symmetric compared to your radiation. Okay, so all this entire edge, circumferential edge of your circular ground plane is going to diffract the fields. So you will have infinite number of diffracted rays. Okay, you will have infinite number of diffracted rays, as you can see. And as a result of that, along the axis, you will have a much higher values for your diffracted fields. And this kind of radiator is called a ring radiator. Okay, this kind of radiator is called a ring radiator. And as a result of that, along this z-axis, in the broadside direction, you will see additional radiation due to the diffraction from the edges. And that's why it also leads to higher levels for the back lobes. Now these are the some of the other cases. You can again do similar analysis for the when you have a aperture on a finite ground plane, when you have a aperture opening on a finite ground plane and that aperture is radiating. Okay, so then maybe you can assume that you have a, like a slot, okay, like a very narrow slot, and that slot is radiating, and that slot is basically mounted on a finite ground plane with a finite size. So for that you would have something like a uniform field distribution over this surface area SA. And again for that, if you have a, let's say, proper waveguide aperture, then you would have TE10 mode, dominant mode, then this would be your field distribution. Again, if you remember, now here E fields are basically parallel to these edges, so diffracted fields are not that pronounced in that direction. However, they will be pronounced in this direction along this edges. So in the vertical plane, you will have a more or stronger, you will have a stronger diffracted fields compared to horizontal plane, right? For this kind of geometry, we have gone through that. Same thing even here for this this kind of circular waveguide opening. Again, you have E field, which is kind of parallel to this vertical edges. Okay, as a result of that, in horizontal plane, which is nothing but H plane, it is also, since it is a parallel to the edge, you will have a kind of a much weaker diffraction from those edges in that plane, horizontal plane or H plane, and that's why it is soft polarization. For this vertical plane, E plane, since your E vector is kind of perpendicular to the edges, you will have much stronger diffraction from those edges, and that's why it is also hard polarization. Again, same thing you can do even for the other case where you have a rectangular waveguide aperture mounted on a finite ground plane. So you can divide your ground plane in two parts. Your edges, you can group them into two. One is upper lower edges, and you can do the similar analysis. So here you will have something like a normal. That's why you have that diffraction plane in one plane. Here you have something similar to conical Kähler cone, right? These things, because you will have something similar to oblique incidence, right? And same thing also you can do for the other edges, left and right edges. Again, you will have here something like oblique incidence, so that's why you will have something like a conical cone, or basically Kähler cone type of structure, and here you will have something like a plane. And we are not going to go into details. All these topics are covered in EEE 643, okay, in chapter 13 of the textbook. So this is out of scope, but this is a brief review of that material, okay. This is a brief overview of that material. And again, as I mentioned that using geometrical optics, you will have incident and reflected fields, and from the edges you will have diffracted fields, okay. Again, for H plane horn, again, as the E vector, E field is parallel to this particular vertical edges, in that H plane you will not have a very strong diffracted fields. However, in the E plane, vertical plane, since E field is perpendicular to the edge, you will have a stronger diffracted fields. And you can see that in the E plane, this is the pattern, okay. And you can see that there is some backside radiation from this kind of geometry. And when we consider the other plane, H plane, here H plane pattern for the H horn, you can see that fields are much lower compared to, in this case, where you have a fields are much stronger, right? So what I am trying to say, for E plane you will have a much broader beam width compared to H plane, because the diffracted fields are not that strong in the H plane. Here you can see that the fields are much lower, okay. So again, you can see that. So if you go here, we are talking about here something around minus 30 dB, okay, minus 30 degree. If we go here, again it is going to be much lower than 30 dB. So this point is 30 dB, But here if you look at this cross section at 0, it is around -30, whereas here you can see that that cross section is somewhere around -15 dB for the E plane, because the higher levels of the diffracted fields. Now the other topic is diffraction from the curved surface. Okay, we have talked about the curved edge, basically edge diffraction. The other one is a curved surface. So we have discussed this diffraction from the curved surface when we consider the cylindrical structure, scattering from the cylindrical structure, and we said that in order to explain diffraction from the curved surface, we use a mechanism of creeping waves. We said that you will have some point where these waves get attached to the surface, so that is a point of attachment. Okay, and then those waves will travel along the circumferential surface of the cylinder. Okay, and when they travel along this surface, they will continuously leak away some energy in terms of radiation, and that is basically we represent as a point of detachment, that is point P. Okay, and that will happen from the both sides, from the upper side and from the lower side. So two opposite sides will have the same mechanism. As a result of that, in the shadow region, they will create some pattern, they will interfere with each other, and they will create some constructive and destructive interference, and that's why you will see lobes in the back side on the shadow, in the shadow region. Again, for this kind of curved surface, the diffracted fields are again proportional to the incident field at the point of attachment, that is Q. Then also you have attachment coefficient, attachment diffraction coefficient, capital D. Okay. After that, you have this attenuation constant, e to the power minus alpha s, that is nothing but decay factor. So as you travel, as those waves, creeping waves travel along the surface, basically they get decay, and they get radiated, right? So that's why e to the power minus alpha s. And again, you will have another diffraction coefficient, that is detachment diffraction coefficient at point P, point of detachment. So that is given by capital D at P. And as we know, you will always have a phase factor, that is e to the power minus j beta rho. So again, you have diffracted fields, which is proportional to incident field. Okay, then attachment diffraction coefficient at point of attachment Q, then decay factor e to the power minus alpha s, then another diffraction coefficient, that is detachment diffraction coefficient at point of detachment D of P, and then in the end you have also phase factor e to the power minus j beta rho. And similarly, the same mechanism can also be used to explain the radiation from the aperture mounted on the cylindrical surface. So as you can see here, this is a direct radiation, and then on the back side in the shadow region, again you will have radiation due to this creeping waves. Okay, so this is nothing but the diffraction from the curved surface. And diffracted fields from the curved surface, the people who contributed, who developed this field, these are the some of the prominent names, or the major contributors in this field, like W. Franz, Levi, J.B. Keller. We already mentioned him multiple times for the Keller cone, right? Then Prabhakar Pathak, PH Pathak from Ohio State. Then also Professor Balanes from the Ohio State. So these guys, they work on this type of problems in 50s, 60s, and even in the early 70s. Now the next topic is spherical structure. So this is the third topic which we wanted to cover in this lecture, and that is scattering from sphere. And why are we interested in scattering from the sphere? The reason is this kind of structures, because of its symmetry, both in the theta direction as well as in the phi direction, since they have rotational symmetry both in the vertical plane as well as in the azimuthal plane, regardless of your direction of your observation point, the radar cross section which will be presented by this spherical structure will remain unchanged. Okay, regardless from where we are observing the structure, the RCS is going to be same because of its rotational symmetry in both orthogonal plane theta and phi, elevation and azimuthal plane. And as a result of that, it is better, or it is favorable to use this kind of structure as a calibration, for a calibration purpose. So we can use these structures as a standard structure, and we can first measure the radar cross section of these structures, because we know that regardless of the orientation, you will have the same value of the RCS, right? Also, we know, we will see in the following slides, we can also derive the analytical formulas for the scattering from this kind of spherical geometries. Okay, so we also know what would be the expected radar cross section for a given geometry with a given radial dimension. Okay, so we can derive those expressions, and we already know that what would be expected radar cross section. So for that, in order to derive those expressions, we will have to first go through orthogonalities, transformations, and theorems. So what we will do is something similar to what we did when we discussed this scattering from the cylindrical structures. We first derive or we went through some orthogonalities, and after that we use those orthogonalities to derive some transformations, like we derive how can we represent a plane wave in terms of cylindrical coordinate system or cylindrical wave function. Same thing we here, we will do the same thing here. We'll see using those orthogonalities, how can we transform the plane wave into spherical wave function. And after that, towards the end, we will also go through some theorems, like we went through addition theorem of Hankel function when we discussed the cylindrical structures. Here for the spherical structures, again we will do something like that. We will go through addition theorem of the spherical Hankel function, and once we go through this, we will be able to, we will have enough tools, mathematical tools, which we can use to derive the scattering from the spherical structure. So we need to go through all these mathematical tools and theorems so that we can we will be able to derive the expressions for the scattering from spherical structures. So let's start that mathematical foundation. Let's build that mathematical foundation first. So as we, again the same thing, that whenever we have some kind of radiating element, visually what we do is we put that radiating element at the origin, right? We put that element at the origin. However, when we talk about the scattering from any structure, what we do is we displace that line source or any other radiating element from the origin, and we place scattering object, we place our scattering object at the origin. So what do we do is we, based on our line source or whatever radiator, we will have some current sources, let's say IE or IM, whether it's electrical current source or magnetic current source. First of all, we will specify those current sources. After that, from that we will be able to find the corresponding potentials, potential A and potential F, and from that we will be able to find the radiated E and radiated H field, right? So we have gone through this standard method, that first we will specify what will be the current densities or current distribution, IE or Im. From that we will derive the potentials, potential A and potential F. And from that, again, using that differentiation, we will be able to find the corresponding radiated E and H field. So let's consider first of all vertical dipole. So this is the typical geometry which we consider, that our vertical dipole or any radiator, we usually place that at the origin, right? When we have only a radiator and we are interested in the radiation pattern of that radiator. So in the first geometry, we have placed our vertical dipole along the z-axis at the origin. Now in the B figure, we have displaced that vertical dipole from the origin. Okay, that is, we have displaced it by radial in the radial direction by r prime distance. So again, this prime coordinates, they basically represents the location and the direction of your sources, and unprimed coordinates r and theta or phi, basically r, theta and phi, all these three unprimed coordinates represents the direction and the location of your observation point. So now you can see that when we displace our line source vertical dipole from the origin of your coordinate system, that capital R is now, instead of this capital R, now that becomes R minus R prime. So this is your new capital R. Again, this is your original geometry where we placed our vertical dipole right at the origin along the z-axis. And as I mentioned, we have two options. Either from that current densities, we can directly find what would be the radiated E and H field by simply doing integration. However, that path 1 is sometimes complicated because you don't have uncoupled equations. So that's why we go through this two-step approach, where first we find these vector potentials A and F by using integration, and from those vector potentials we find the radiated fields E and H by differentiation. Water. So this is, we have gone through this in chapter 3 in the previous course, right? So here we have a current source IE. So as a result of that current source IE, using this integral, right, we can find the corresponding vector potential A. And again, what will be the range of our integration? We will integrate over the length of that dipole. So it will be from negative L by 2 to positive L by 2. And when we do this integration, closed form integration, this will be your vector potential along the z direction. It has a z component. Now we can use this transformation and write that down in terms of AR, A theta and A phi. This is a very simple thing, right? So we can do that. When we do that, from that we'll be able to find the corresponding H field. So these are your H field components, HR, H theta and H phi. As you can see that HR and H theta are 0 and H phi is going to be given by this expression. Similarly, we can again find the E vector that will have ER, E theta and E phi. E phi will be 0 and this will be the expressions for the ER and E theta. So we have gone through this a lot of times, right? We have gone through this process a lot of times whenever we discuss waveguides or even some radiating structures, or we have gone through this method a lot of times, right? So you can go through these steps by yourself. Now, so these are the summary. You have ER, E theta, and then if H phi, these three components are non-zero, and other three components E phi, HR and H theta are 0. Now again, we can write down that radiation from that what we have derived here, right? This is the what we have derived. Now what we can do is we can write that in terms of spherical wave functions. So how will we do that? So we know that the Hankel function of second kind for the large argument of beta r, that is large argument, for a large argument, this Hankel function of second kind has the asymptotic expansion of this format, right? This is the asymptotic expansion which we have been using a lot of times when we discuss cylindrical functions, cylindrical structures. So from that, using that expression, we can replace this e to the power minus j beta r by this Hankel function. And when we do that, we can rewrite this vector potential A and vector potential F like this in terms of Hankel function of second kind. So now we have represented those vector potentials instead of exponentials. Now we have represented them in terms of Hankel function of the second kind. Again, so now what we will do, now we will shift our radiating element from origin to some offset coordinate point. So that is at r prime, theta prime and phi prime. So now we have displaced our radiating element from the origin to some other point in our observation region. And when we do that, we have gone through this step even when we did scattering from the cylindrical structure. What we will do, we will simply change this argument, right? We'll now change this argument of the Hankel function. So that's what we do. Now we change that argument. Now your capital R, this capital R is no longer small r. Previously it was small r, but now that is r minus r prime. Okay, it is now r minus r prime. So that is why you have this displaced argument in the Hankel function of second kind for both the vector A and vector F. Correct? Now this is what we have derived. These are the expressions of the vector potential A and vector potential F, and with the displaced argument, right? With the displaced argument. Now what we will do is we'll go through some theorems and transformation, and for that we'll first go through the orthogonality. So like similar to what we saw when we discussed the cylindrical structures, for the spherical structures, if you remember, we use associated Legendre function for the theta variation. Now those associated Legendre functions, this Legendre polynomials, okay, p and cosine theta and associated Legendre functions p and m cosine theta, they are they create orthogonal set. They create orthogonal. They create a set of orthogonal functions in a range for theta equals to 0 to pi. So for that range, from theta equals to 0 to theta equals to pi, we can write any function. We can write any function as a summation of these orthogonal functions, like we do in the we do that in the Fourier transformation or Fourier series, right? In the Fourier series, we use sine and cosine functions. We use sine and cosine functions. Those are again, they create orthogonal. They again create a set of orthogonal functions. Similarly, here in the spherical coordinate system, we can write down any function as an infinite summation of these associated Legendre polynomials or associated Legendre functions. And that's what here you can see, right? Therefore, in this interval, any arbitrary wave function can be represented as a series of Legendre polynomials, and that is this p and cosine of theta. Now, these polynomials, okay, Legendre polynomials are also called zonal harmonics. Okay, they are also called zonal harmonics. Okay, That is the one particular thing. Now, the other one is, other one is, if we multiply sine and cosine theta, if we multiply sine and cosine theta with this associated Legendre functions, okay, that is p and m cosine of theta. If we multiply them with sines and cosines, then this will be your functions, right? So we have now cosine of m phi and sine of m phi, right? So when we do that, these functions are referred as tesseract harmonics. Okay, these functions are called tesseract harmonics. Previous one was zonal harmonics. This one is tesseract harmonics. And again, this function also forms a set of orthogonal functions. And what is the domain? What is the region over which they create this orthogonality set? That is basically for a complete surface of a sphere. So if we are taking an surface, and we are considering a surface over a sphere, then that for over that surface of a sphere, we can use this orthogonal set of functions. We can use this set of orthogonal functions which are known as tesseract harmonics, which are nothing but a multiplication of associated Legendre functions with sine and cosines. And we can again write down any arbitrary function as a summation of these orthogonal functions. So these are the orthogonality relation. As you can see that here, this is one type of Legendre polynomial, Pn of cosine theta. Then there is another Pm of cosine theta. So when you have n not equals to m, then it will be 0. And for n equals to m, it will have non-zero value. And again, we are integrating over 0 to pi. Theta equals to 0 to pi. So in that region, this is the orthogonality relation. And as a result of that, in that region, for theta equals to 0 to pi, any random function, any arbitrary function f of theta can be represented as an infinite summation of these Legendre polynomials. Okay, where this an coefficient is given by this integral, and this series is known as the Fourier Legendre series. So this is something similar to which we have been doing in the Fourier analysis, Fourier series, right? Where you have a sine and cosine. Here you have in terms of Legendre polynomials. Similarly, for the tesseract harmonics, these are the two functions. One is an even function. In that you multiply by cosine of m phi, and then you also have odd function where you multiply it by sine m phi. So again, this integral we already know that when you have sine p phi times sine q phi, when p and q are not equal to each other, then it will be 0. And if we integrate from 0 to 2 pi, okay, if we integrate over an entire one period, 0 to 2 pi, then it will be 0 if p and q are not equal. However, if p and q are equal, non-zero, okay, then you will have a pi, so non-zero value. So again, this they create a orthogonal set of functions, orthogonal functions. Sorry, and we can show that using that orthogonality, we can show that even when mn is not equal to pq, for that you can see that these integrals are 0. Okay, these integrals are 0, and similarly for both of them, they are non-zero. They are non-zero when m equals when m is non-zero. Basically, when m is non-zero, and this is for m equals to 0. So what I am saying is previously, when mn is not equals to pq, basically you get a zeros, right? And when they are equal, basically you get this kind of non-zero response. So again, this is a orthogonality for a tesseract functions. So using those orthogonalities, now what we will do is we'll derive some transformation, and then in the end we'll also go through theorems, so that we can start talking about the scattering from this spherical structure. So as we know that, we will consider a case where we have a plane wave. Okay, when we have a plane wave propagating in a positive z direction. Again, this will be propagating in positive z direction for our assumed time convention, that is e to the power positive j omega t. So when we have positive e to the power j omega t time convention, in that case, this function represents a wave propagating in a positive z direction. Also, E field is directed in the positive x direction. Okay. Now what we can do is we can convert that z, that beta z, into this beta r cosine theta by taking a projection. Okay. That is a straightforward thing. And once we have that, we can write them in terms of infinite summation of spherical Bessel function and Legendre polynomial. Okay, we did this similar thing when we discuss the cylindrical scattering from the cylindrical structures, right? Where we actually represented that as a infinite summation of Bessel function. Here we have an infinite summation of the spherical Bessel function of first kind, and along with that we have Legendre polynomial. Okay, now what we will do is uh, we still don't know what is this unknown coefficient a of an, right? So we'll derive that. We'll use the similar procedure which we use for the cylindrical structures. So what we'll do is we will multiply left and right side by certain function and then integrate over certain region. So that's what we will do. So this is our geometry, and our plane wave is propagating in positive z direction, and your E field is directed in the x direction. So this is your E field. This is your Ki incident wave vector in the positive z direction, and this is your H field along the y direction. Now what we are doing is we are multiplying both sides by this polynomial Pn of cosine theta times sine theta. Okay, and then we are integrating from theta from 0 to pi. So we are integrating from 0 to pi, and then also we are multiplying both sides by this function Pn of cosine theta times sine theta. Okay, and when we do that, basically when we do that, here you can see, right, we multiply that, and here also we are integrating. So when we do that, actually this should be Pm. Okay, this should be Pm, not Pn. So when we do that, this is your equation. And using that orthogonality, and by doing some mathematical manipulations, we know that, okay, when n is equals to m, this will be non-zero value of that integration. Okay, however, when they are not equal, n is not equals to m, it will be 0. So you will only have one term. Instead of summation, you will have only one term, and that will be given by this expression. So right hand side will only have one term. This summation will get reduced down to one value. Okay, so when you do that, this will be your right hand side, and from that we will be able to will be able to derive the expressions of the a of m. So this will be your expression for the a of m which we wanted to derive. So we use that orthogonality, and using that orthogonality we were able to find this value of a of m. So if we substitute that back into the expression of ex, this will be your expression of ex in terms of infinite summation of Bessel function, spherical Bessel function, and Legendre polynomial, with an is given by this expression. Now let's say instead of waves propagating in positive z direction, let's say if you have a wave propagating in the negative z direction like this, then this will be positive j beta z. And when you go through the same procedure, of derivation, you will see that instead of j to the power minus n, now you will have j to the power plus n for this bn. Okay, previously you had j to the power minus n in the expression of an here. So we are not going to go through that derivation, but you can follow the same procedure. Again, so the same thing, if we have that radiating element not at the origin, and let's say it is displaced from the origin to certain other location, then the radiated fields from that radiating element, vertical dipole, can also be explained by using something called addition theorem of spherical wave function. That is addition theorem of spherical Hankel function. Previously we used addition theorem of Hankel functions. Here we are using addition theorem of the spherical wave function. We are not going to go through the derivation, but it is similar to what we derive for the cylindrical waves. So this is what we are doing. Instead of here, now we are placing that vertical dipole at some offset location from the origin. And when we do that, this will be your expression for that Hankel function of the second kind with the displace argument. And again, this Hankel function is not your typical Hankel function. This Hankel function is spherical Hankel function. It's a spherical Hankel function, small h later. Okay, it is a small h later. So this is a spherical Hankel function of the second kind, and this is a spherical Hankel function of the first kind. And these are the addition theorem. So now you can have that in terms of Bessel function in the first region where r is less than r prime, and for the second region where r is greater than r prime, then you have a Hankel function of the second kind. And again, those Hankel function and Bessel functions are spherical Hankel function and spherical Bessel function. Same thing here also. For the first region, again you have in terms of spherical Bessel function and spherical Hankel function of first kind. For our problem, we are going to discuss scattering. For the scattering, we know that waves are going to move away. They are going to travel away. They are going to leave the origin in the radial direction. And as a result of that, we know that for that we use Hankel function of second kind. Here we are going to use spherical Hankel function of second kind. So let's start. Since we have built our mathematical foundation, now we can discuss these scattering from the spherical structure. And for that, let's say that we have a PEC perfectly perfect electrically conducting sphere, and it is placed at the origin. Okay, so we are going to consider that geometry. And as I mentioned again, that why are we interested in this kind of structures? Why do we want to find scattering from spherical structure? So the thing is, it has rotational symmetry in both the orthogonal planes, elevation plane along theta as well as azimuthal plane along phi. So irrespective of its rotation, it always presents the same radar cross section. Okay, it gives the same radar cross section, and as a result of that, it is a very good structure which can be considered as a standard structure which can be used for calibration purpose. And that's what you can see, that because of its symmetry, PEC sphere is often used as a reference structure or scatterer to measure the scattering properties of some complicated structures like radar targets like missiles, aeroplanes, or helicopters. So it can be used, or I should not say it can be, it is used as a for the calibration purposes. So again, that's what you can see here in this slide as well. And these are some of the typical spheres, PEC spheres. They are aluminum spheres for the calibration purposes. Okay, for the radar cross section calibration purposes. Now, so we'll start with the discussion on PEC spheres. Okay, PEC spheres, and then towards the end of the lecture, we will also discuss scattering from the dielectric sphere. So what we will do is we'll place our spherical structure at the origin. Okay, and then we'll incident a plane wave from the negative z-axis. We'll place our source in the negative z-axis in the far field, so that we will have a plane wave incidence in the positive z direction. So waves are going to propagate in the positive direction, and again your E field is going to be polarized in the x direction. Okay, it will be polarized in the x direction, and they will be traveling along the positive x direction, along z axis in the positive z direction. So this will be your incident wave, and this is your geometry, spherical geometry placed at the origin. Okay, it has a radial dimension of a, So again, we'll start with that transformation. So this is your E vector, and this is your incident waves, right? Plane waves. And we have gone through this, that we can write that down like this. Now what we can do is, using the coordinates transformation, we can write down this AX component and convert them into three components: AR, A theta, and A phi. Okay, using this matrix. So this is what we have basically. This is what the problem we have, that let's say you have some incidenting waves, okay, and from that these are the scattered fields. So basically those scattered fields are going to be something similar to Henkel function of second kind, spherical Henkel function of second kind. So let's see how can we represent them. So these are the AR, A theta, and A phi. Okay, and this is what we have: AR, A theta, A phi in terms of EX. Okay, in terms of EX, using those transformation, using these transformations. Now for that EX itself, if you remember, for EX itself, we can represent them as a infinite summation of the spherical Bessel function and the Legendre polynomial, right? We just derived that. So we will use that transformation. So for EX itself, okay, in these expressions, for this EXI, EXI, and EXI, we are going to replace that by this infinite summation. We are going to substitute that. When we do that, this will be your extended expression for ER, E theta, and E phi. Along with that, we will also use this identity of the spherical Bessel function, and also this identity for the polynomial, for the associated Legendre functions, that whenever this superscript is greater than subscript, it is going to be 0. So when we use these identities, this will be your expressions for ER, E theta, and E phi. Okay, and from that, what we are going to do is, for TM and TM to R and TE to R modes, we know how to find the vector wave potential, right? We have gone through that problem at the beginning of the topic, right? We derived that. So we have TE to R and TM to R, those two modes. And if you remember, why are we interested? Why do we represent this in terms of TM to R and TE to R? So when we discuss chapter 10, basically when we have spherical geometry, we would like to have the modes which are conformal to your structure. And here in our case, we have a spherical symmetry, right? So we want to have a modes which are in the spherical coordinates. So we cannot use TE to Z or TM to Z. It will be much more difficult. So that's why we also derive some expression for TM to R and TE to R, because it is much more convenient to use those modes. And we went through that procedure. So we know that for TM to R, HR is going to be 0 and AR is going to be non-zero. That is the only component which will be non-zero. For TE to R, only FR is going to be non-zero. So we know this, right? We have gone through this. So if we do that for TE to R, this will be, let's say, your vector potential F, and for TM to R, this is your vector potential. Actually, this should be capital A, not capital F. This should be capital A, AR. Okay, this should be AR, and then vector potential F is 0 for TM to R. What we will do is, we know that once we have that vector potential, we can write the corresponding EIR, right? Incident radiating incident E field along the radial direction. So that is given by this particular expression. We know that. We have been using this expression, right? So what we will do is, we have this expression for ER, using this vector wave potential. And we also derive some expression for ER here, right? In terms of infinite summation of spherical Bessel function as well as associated Legendre polynomial. Also notice that here now this is nothing, this is not the spherical Bessel function. Actually it is a Shokhanov's spherical Bessel function. It has a hat on top of that, right? So it's a spherical, it's a Shokhanov spherical Bessel function, and along with that you have associated Legendre polynomial multiplied with that. So what we do is we will equate this equation and this equation. Okay, when we do that, we will be able to write down the expression of AR in terms of infinite summation of Shokhanov spherical Bessel function and the associated Legendre polynomial or associated Legendre function, sorry, where an is given by this expression. Okay, so now we have expression of AR. Similarly, for T to R, we have expression of FR. We can follow the same procedure. We can equate the expression of HR, and from that we can derive what should be the expression of FR. So these are the expression of FR. So now we have derived expression of AR and FR. From that, we can find what should be the radiated fields, right? So again, this will be what we did for cylinders. This is a similar thing, that we know that these are the vector wave potential for A and F for incident waves in terms of Bessel functions, that is Shokhanov spherical Bessel function. So similarly, we can represent the scattered field in terms of the spherical Shokhanov Hankel function of second kind. It's a Shokhanov spherical Hankel function of second kind, right? So that is nothing but here. You can see that we can write them scattered A and scattered F vector potentials in terms of infinite summation of Shokhanov's spherical Hankel function of second kind, right? So we just simply replace that Shokhanov spherical Bessel function by Shokhanov spherical Hankel function in order to get the expressions of AR and FR. However, still we don't know what are these unknown coefficients, Bn and Cn. So these are the unknown coefficients, right? So previously we also had one unknown coefficient when we we followed the same or similar procedure for cylindrical structure. Here we have now two unknown coefficients, but we also have two equations. We have AR and FR. So how will we find those expressions? Well, what we will do is we'll find the E field. We will find the scattered E field, and we already know the incident E field. We'll add them together. We will get the total E field. From that, we'll take the tangential component of that E field to the surface of the sphere. So what are those components? E phi and E theta. So we can have two equations, E theta and E phi. Okay, E theta and E phi. And from those two equations, we can apply that boundary condition at r equals to A. Those two components, E theta and E phi, should go to 0. Okay, and when we enforce those two boundary conditions, impose those two boundary conditions, we will be able to find this unknown coefficient B and Cn. So let's go through that process. So these are the total ER, E theta and E phi components, where one of the contribution is coming from this AR component and the other one is coming from the F. So AR is basically nothing but your TM to R, and this is from TE to R. Okay, since it's a TE to R, your ER component is going to be 0, right? It's obvious. So this green portion of the equations is nothing but from TE to R or F potential, and this blue portion is coming from the AR potential or TM to R potential or TM to R mode, sorry. Similarly, you have expression for HT, R, H phi and H theta. Okay, again for this blue portion is coming from TM to R. Since it's TM to R, obviously your HR is going to be 0, and these green portions are coming from TE to R component, that is vector potential F. Now again we can add these incident and scattered vector potentials, okay, and then get the total vector potential. So then you will have unknown coefficient B and C here, right? We already know what is the expression of AN, right? We already know that. That is given by this expression. Now from that we can find what would be the total E field, E theta and E phi. When we do that, we have two equations by applying two boundary conditions at r equals to a. So when we apply that, E theta t should go to 0, okay, at r equals to a. This will be your expression of that total E field, okay, and you have two unknowns Bn and Cn, okay. Again, here this prime, that prime represents the differentiation with respect to beta r argument for the spherical Bessel function and Hankel function, and that prime for the Hankel function these are the same, okay, and this prime for the associated Legendre function represents the differentiation with respect to theta, okay. So this prime is nothing but with respect to theta, and these two are with respect to beta r argument. So when you do that and apply those boundary conditions, you will be able to get those Bn and Cn. So when we substitute that back into the expression, this will be your expression for scattered E field, Er, E theta and E phi. And again, these are the definitions of those primes, differentiations. Again, now what we will do is, now we know what are the expressions for the E scattered and H scattered. The next step is to find what are the expression in the far field, and for that we'll apply this identity which connects our Shokhanov's spherical Bessel function to our normal typical Shokhanov's spherical Hankel function of second kind to our typical Hankel function of second kind by this expression. And if you remember, those are related by nothing but half shift in the order. So if you change that order by half, you can relate them. So we have shown that when we discuss chapter 10, okay, when we discuss chapter 10 spherical structures for as a waveguide and radiator, at that time we discussed that identity, right? So we'll use that identity, and along with that, once we can convert that to a Hankel function of second kind, we know that for the large argument, we have the asymptotic expansion in terms of the exponential function. So we will use this two first identity, which connects the Shokhanov spherical Hankel function to typical Hankel function, and then we will apply this large argument asymptotic expansion, and we will finally represent that in terms of exponential functions. When we will do that, this will be your transformations for this spherical Shokhanov spherical Bessel function in terms of exponentials, and we will substitute these expressions. We will get the far field E field and H field, scattered far field for E and H. So when we do that, these are the expressions. ER is going to be approximately 0 when we compare with the other two components, E theta and E phi. Okay, if you go through that, you will see that that ER radial component is going to be much smaller than the other two components, and that's why we can ignore that. We can make it 0, and so you effectively have two components, E theta and E phi, and they are given by these two expressions. From that, we can find what will be the radar cross section of this kind of sphere, PEC sphere, okay? Because we applied that boundary condition for E theta, right? So this is for the sphere. So this is the expression of the radar cross section, biostatic radar cross section, where A theta is given by this expression and A phi is given by this expression. Now for the monostatic RCS, so if you remember, this is our geometry, this is our sphere at the origin, placed at the origin, and then we have waves which are coming from the negative z direction and they are traveling in the positive z direction. Okay, so that means your transmitter or your source is placed in the far field along the negative z axis. That means theta equals to pi. That is theta equals to pi. So for the monostatic RCS, you would like to also place your receiver at the same location, right? We have to place our receiver also at the same location. So that is going to be theta r equals to pi. So theta I equals to theta r equals to pi. And when we substitute these values of theta r, theta I, we will be able to get the monostatic RCS. When we do that, again, that scattered E field, that, okay, so here is the thing. Since it's a curvature, we can have, since it's a spherical curvature, we can have both copolarized and cross-polarized scattered field. Okay. Here, let's say if you are interested in a copolarized RCS, we only want a copolar RCS. And for copole, for the copolar component, basically we are interested in the X component because our incident waves were directed in the X direction. Okay, so that copole component, we can find that Ex by E theta or E phi. But how will you find that? You have to look at phi equals to pi plane or phi equals to 3 pi by 2 plane, based on in which plane you are looking. So when phi equals to pi, that is this plane. Okay, that is phi equals to pi is what? That is nothing but your xz plane. That is this plane, right? That is your zxz plane. So that is along this negative x axis, right? That is nothing but phi equals to pi. Phi equals to pi is phi equals to 180 degree. That means it's a negative x axis. So it is along xz plane. So if you are looking in the xz plane, okay, then what will happen? For the theta equals to pi, your whatever the component you will get, E theta component, will be directed in the X direction, So that is a one way of finding the Ex scattered from the E theta scattered. We want to find Ex scattered from the E theta scattered. The other way is you can also find Ex scattered from the E phi component. How? Now in order to do that, you will have to change your plane of observation. So now instead of observing in the XZ plane, we can observe in this YZ plane. Okay, if we observe in the YZ plane and along the minus Y direction, that is going to be phi equals to 3 pi by 2. And when we do that, okay, when we look into the YZ plane, what will be the direction of your E phi? Okay, what will be direction of your E phi? Here, E phi along the Y direction will be something like this, right? Something like this. However, when we are looking in the negative direction, it will be something like this. So again, it will be in the positive X direction, right? When we are coming like this at theta equals to pi and phi equals to 3 pi by 2, in that YZ plane, your Ex component is nothing but equals to E phi. It will be E phi or E phi, whatever you want to pronounce, E phi, right? So there are two ways you can find your Ex component from E theta or E phi. Along with that, we will also use these identities for theta equals to pi. Okay, when we place that, this will be expressions for these components. Okay, and when we do that, this will be your expressions for E theta. Okay, and you can see that here again you have something like a Wronskian. Here now this is a Wronskian of a spherical Bessel function. Previously we had a Wronskian of a Bessel function. Here this is a real Wronskian of the spherical Bessel function, and we know that that is nothing but a 1. Okay, so when we substitute that value, this will be the reduced expression of your scattered E theta. Okay, and from that we can find what will be the expression of Ex. Okay, since this is theta equals to pi and phi equals to pi, right, it will give us a Ex component, right? That's what we derive here. We showed that theta equals to pi and phi equals to pi, E theta will become Ex. So from that, this will be your expression for the monostatic RCS. So this is a monostatic RCS with a copole. Okay, this is a copole, and you can see that basically based on the radial dimension of your sphere, we can derive, or sorry, we can divide our scattering region in three parts. First region is Rayleigh region, Raleigh, Rayleigh, Raleigh, whatever you want to pronounce. Rayleigh region where the radial dimension is less than 0.1 lambda. And this is again, this is a typical definition. Okay, this is not a hard bound definition. There is no there is no clear cut boundaries. This is a typical range. So it is like a transition from one region to other region. Okay, it's like a transition. It's not some hard bound boundaries. Okay, so this is a first region, typical region defined when the radial dimension is smaller than 0.1 lambda, and this kind of scattering you would see from the rain droplet. Okay, rain droplet. Again, that rain droplet is not a PEC sphere. Okay, we will go through that as well. But again, a rain droplet would have something like that type of dimension with respect to the optical frequencies, wavelength corresponding to optical frequencies for visible light. Okay, now the second region is when your radial dimension is from 0.1 lambda to 2 lambda. That is Mie resonance or Mia resonance, again whatever you want to pronounce, Mie resonance. Okay, and the third part is the optical part where basically your radial dimension is much greater than wavelength, that is maybe greater than 2 lambda. Okay, so in the first region it follows the Rayleigh scattering approximation, and in the third region, basically it follows the geometrical optics approximation. Basically it follows the geo approximation, and what you will see is for much greater dimension, much greater radial dimension compared to wavelength, the radar cross section is going to be equal to, the physical cross section of the sphere. That is, it will approach to pi a square value. It will approach to pi a square, which is nothing but a physical cross sectional area of the sphere. Now that is what here you can see. You can divide this into three regions. So this is the first region. Okay, and then here you would have something here. So in this region you see this resonance, that is nothing but Mie resonance or Mia resonance. In this region, first region, basically you have something like if you normalize that with respect to pi a square, it follows a to the power 4. Okay, it changes as a function of a to the power 4, and this is nothing but Rayleigh's relation. Okay, here you can see that relation, right? So this is Rayleigh's scattering. Okay, and when we go further in the x-axis, that is a much larger dimension, when a is much greater than lambda, for that basically this will be like something like it will approach to this line, horizontal line, which is nothing but 1, and this 1 is normalized to pi a square. That means absolute value of this line is pi a square. So in other words, for a large radial dimensions, the radar cross section of your sphere is going to approach towards the physical cross sectional area pi a square. And again we can derive that. So if we apply this limit a tends to 0, then if you follow these mathematical steps, you will see that this will be your expression for the small spheres, and you can see that basically it is proportional to a to the power 4 if you just normalize by pi a square. So your radar cross section normalized to its physical cross section is proportional to a to the power 4, which is nothing but Rayleigh or Raleigh region scattering. Then we can also find the other asymptotic expansion when beta A is approaching towards infinite. In that case, this will be your approximation for the Hankel function of second kind. And when we go through that, this will be your radar cross section for the large argument. And you can see that it is approaching to its physical cross sectional area pi a square. And that is nothing but optical region scattering. Optical region scattering. So for the large spheres, this is what you have, okay? And in between, for the my resonance or Mia resonance, basically you have to go through the, you have to use the complete expression which we derive, okay? We cannot apply this asymptotic approximations. You have to use uh, the original formula in order to predict those resonance, okay? And all these methods for mathematical those expansions and manipulations are basically given from this particular paper, okay? Now again, this is the same thing, that this is the first region and this is the another region, optical region, and this is a Rayleigh region, and in between you have some resonances which is nothing but May resonance or Mia resonance. So you have three regions, Rayleigh, Raleigh, the other one is May, Mia, optic or resonance, and the third region is optical region. And again, these are the typical conditions. These are the typical conditions. These are not well-defined hard boundaries. So this is the RCS, okay? And again, in this book, Radar Cross Section by Nord, Sheffier, and Toole, this is the another expression of the monostatic RCS as a function of radial dimension A, okay? And one more thing, this is a very good book. One should read this book if someone is working in radar cross section. It's a very good book. Now, we can follow the same procedure for the dielectric sphere. As of now, whatever we have derived is for perfectly conducting PEC sphere. Now we can extend the same procedure for dielectric sphere. So for dielectric sphere, what will happen? If you remember, for E field, E theta and E phi, we said that the total E theta and E phi should vanish on the surface of the sphere. Now in this case, we will not apply that condition because it's a dielectric, and whenever we have two regions, dielectric regions or two regions, basically the generic boundary condition is that your fields should be continuous, okay? Your fields should be continuous, and we will apply that continuity condition in this case, since we in the inner portion inside the sphere we have a dielectric sphere, dielectric media, and on the outside of the sphere we have a free space or even another type of dielectric region. So when we apply that, this is our geometry, right? So what we will do is, now inside the material we'll apply some we'll use this complex permittivity, okay, and complex permeability to represent also some losses, okay, to generalize that expression. And what we will do is, inside this sphere, now we will have additional vector potentials, something similar to what we had for the exterior. For the external region, we define some vector potential. Similarly, now inside the sphere, we will also have some waves which are going to be non-zero. Previously it was PEC, so fields were zero. Now we have also fields inside the sphere, and those fields are going to bounce back and forth, right? So that's why those vector potentials are going to be something similar to of spherical Bessel function. So when we look at these expressions, the vector potential A and vector potential F inside the sphere, that is A are T minus and F are T minus total. Basically, they will have something like this, where your capital J with a hat represents the Shokhanov spherical Bessel function of first kind. Okay. And again, this beta with that dot on top of that represent that it has a loss mechanism. So that beta comes from that this loss mechanism, that epsilon r dot and mu r dot. So again, we can follow the same conditions that at r equals to a, the tangential components of E field and the tangential component of magnetic field, we can apply those boundary condition on those components and find using continuity condition, we can find what will be this unknown coefficient dn and en. So we have here dn and en which are unknown. So we want to find out that. So these are the four conditions on tangential component of E field as well as H field. So E theta T minus is going to be equal to E theta T plus, E phi T minus is going to be equal to E phi T plus, H theta T minus is going to be H theta T plus, and H phi T minus is going to be H phi T plus at R equals to A on the surface of the sphere. When we apply those conditions, from that we will be able to find those unknown coefficients. For outside the sphere, for the potential we had unknowns Bn and Cn, and for inside we have Dn and En. So we have four unknowns, four equation, four boundary condition, and when we do that, when we solve that, these are the expressions for those unknown coefficients Bn, Cn, Bn and En. Okay. Okay. Also, if you have a very small radius, okay, if you have a very small radius, that is what you would see for rain droplet, right? For rain droplet, the radius is much smaller compared to wavelength, and that's why you see Rayleigh type of scattering. So for that, this will be the values of those coefficients D1, C1, D1 and E1. Okay, so these are the expressions, and what you do is you substitute this back into the vector potentials, and from that vector potential you will get the scattered E field and H field, and from that you will be able to derive the expression of the radar cross section. So again, we are not showing that derivation here, but there is also this code given with the book, textbook. You can go and run that in MATLAB and it will give you the radar cross section. Basically, it is again programmed for the dielectric sphere as well as PEC sphere. So it has PEC as well as dielectric spheres. So we will end this lecture here, and from the next lecture we will move to the next chapter, that is chapter 15, and in that we will start discussing the Green's function. Okay, thank you so much. See you next time in the next lecture.